So you pioneered some of these innovations of how to present weather on TV.
Yes, more or less out of necessity, because I just did not like a static map, and I did not like to see weather people point to a line and say, well, this front is moving that way, and they'd be pushing like that line is supposed to move. I said, well, if it's going to move that way, why don't you make it move that way? And so I did that on film.
You also did some teaching at Jacksonville University.
I taught twice in Jacksonville. I almost forgot about that there was a teacher's strike back in the 1960s, and the TV station, Glenn Marshall, had suggested that while the teachers were on strike and the classes were still, schools were still open, they wanted volunteers to go and teach. So I taught a math class over in Arlington Junior High as either math or science. But that was just for a short term, a month or two. Then in 1975, Jacksonville University wanted me to teach their meteorology class, and so I taught meteorology there for 17 years.
While you were still working at Channel 4?
Yes. I worked in the evenings at Channel 4, so I would go to Jacksonville University from 9 until 11. One time I had 2 classes because everybody wanted to enroll in the meteorology class.
And I suppose the curriculum and what you were teaching had changed a lot since your days of going to those same kinds of classes at FSU.
Yes, in fact, I got the latest textbooks from these book companies, and so in some of the latest books and they got very visual with the advance of color and printing processes that I could keep up with the cloud seeding and the study of hurricanes and what they've learned about tornadoes with their computer studies. And so I kept up with a lot of the advances just by teaching.
Still a good career, meteorology.
It is. It's very fascinating. It's changed. It's not the hands-on like we had to take the raw numbers off of a printer and put them on a piece of paper on a chart and draw the lines and analyze it. Now the computer, zip, it's analyzed, so we don't have to go through the meticulous analysis that we did back then. And we didn't have the big gaps in weather data because the weather satellites show the entire Earth. And back then we had to depend on ships sending individual reports, and there were big gaps, and hurricane hunters had to go fly over vast thousands of miles of ocean waters to see if there is a storm out there. And so now it's so fascinating that everything comes in through the computer. And in addition to that, now we have the computer models that used to be just the equations that we had in college. Now the computer models have been processed into creating the pictures of the clouds and particularly depicting the weather rather than just showing numbers. One big change has been, back when I first started, people said, oh, you're a weatherman. Says, you always get it wrong. They always remembered that.
They remember those forecasts.
They remember those. And actually, when I first started, you couldn't forecast more than 2 days in advance. Anything beyond that is really up for grabs. But now...
You might as well be using the Farmer's Almanac for that.
Well, that's where the Farmer's Almanac was so popular. And the only thing we could do is go by what we call climatology, what normally happens that time for the season, but not any specific weather.
But now with a greater degree of reliability, you can go for 7-day forecasting.
Yes, the 7-day, and there's always that uncertainty about 7 days, especially if something enters the picture, like a hurricane that was not there when you first made the 7-day forecast. If one popped up on the 3rd day, then that would change the forecast the last 3 days in some respects. But the computers have been able to, and plus the satellites filling in all the data over these unknown regions of the Earth.
47 years at the same station may be a record. If we look, we might find one that was more, but that's very impressive.
They're very, very few. Most of them are especially at the same station.
Yes.
Because I know a few that have been at different stations. Harry Volkman in Chicago,
Who've continued broadcasting.
But he just retired about
yeah.
2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
He was 80 years old when he retired and had a very distinguished career, starting off in Oklahoma City, which was a big tornado area.
Mm-hmm.
And of course,
I suppose you may have considered other offers from time to time.
well, David Letterman started off as a weatherman.
Exactly. but even to go and forecast weather somewhere else, because the question I was going to get at was forecasting weather may be more interesting in some parts of the world than others. The weather may be more interesting there. And so how does Northeast Florida, you wanted to stay in Northeast Florida for various reasons, maybe not just because of the weather, but is Northeast Florida just kind of interesting from a weather forecaster point of view?
Well, I think the one thing is weather is something that kind of grows on you, and the more you experience it, the more background you have into it. In fact, we had a meteorologist, Rufus Hafer, and a lot of times he would be working during the day, and I'd come in about 2 or 3 in the afternoon to take over from him, and he had been forecasting one thing, and as soon as I walked in the door and I said, well, this is going to happen, and he would be very perturbed. He said, here you just walk in the door and you tell me something about the weather, and I've been looking at it all day long and I don't see it.
And that's because you had a lot of longevity in this part of the world?
Yes, because I could almost feel and could see what was transpiring. And the same thing with hurricanes. A lot of the newcomers that are not experienced with tropical storms and hurricanes, they'll see a hurricane that's down in the Caribbean or in the Atlantic Ocean, and they'll say, well, I'm concerned. I want to be sure it's not coming this way. Well, I'll see right away that here's a front coming, and it's going to turn that, and see the jet stream's going to come, and it's going to pick it up.
I think what a lot of people saw all these years when you're on the air is your passion for what you do. You really seem to enjoy it. And I guess everybody should be so lucky. But you do seem to have made the right career choice, and it's something that you really enjoyed for a long, long time and still enjoy.
Well, I've kind of come from a long line of people who have had similar experiences. Hurricane Center has had Gordon Dunn and Bob Simpson and people who have grown with meteorology.
And they were passionate about it.
They were passionate.
Yeah.
Grady Norton was the old timer. In fact, an interesting highlight of Jacksonville is that the Hurricane Center used to be started right here in Jacksonville, Florida, before it went to Miami. But I found that in television, I had spent most of my time not just reporting the weather on TV, but going to Palatka and Lake City and St. Augustine, St. Simons and Fernandina and Folkestone and Hilliard and different places where people are, and meeting with them and answering their questions and explaining to them the facts about the weather.
And we thank WJXT for recording and editing the interview with George. We'll be doing more of these oral histories this year. And that's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. For more information, contact the Jacksonville Historical Society at 665-0064 or visit the website, jackshistory.com. So long, everyone.